But eventually you do have to address everything that you are seeing, because if you're in the career long enough, and depending on where your jurisdiction or agency is, the bodies tend to pile up, and if you don't do anything with that, you're just sitting there with all that stuff that you're trying to process and carry on with a normal life, so to speak.
Hey there, my name's Ashley Church.
And I'm Erin West.
We were once newly promoted crime scene and latent print supervisors on mutual struggle buses as we both simultaneously tried to navigate through the challenges within our forensic units.
Now we run a business where we create tools and resources that we wish we had had to make these transitions easier. We like to talk about the experiences we've had in the forensic field, the good, the bad, and the ugly, in the hopes to create awareness around these issues and move the needle forward to create positive change in the forensic community.
So if you're a forensic professional, regardless of your years of experience, who's not afraid to dive into real, raw, and sometimes uncomfortable topics, you're in the right place.
This is the Forensics Unfiltered podcast.
So if you have been here for any length of time, then you know mental health has always been a topic that we have discussed at Gap Science. At our very first forensic supervision course, literally like the very first class, we decided on the last day that we were going to have a talk or a lecture about staff care and self-care. And we are very vulnerable in that particular lecture, talking about our own struggles with mental health. And since then, we have gone on and continued this discussion in our virtual summits, on our social media pages. So it's something that we think needs to continue to be talked about more. And we are always so grateful that other people have wanted to join us on this mission to do better in the forensic field and make sure that we have something better for the future generations than just suck it up buttercup. That is a great short-term solution. I do recognize that we need a mental toughness in this field. We're going to be seeing some very graphic things, and you can't just collapse on scene and have a mental breakdown on scene every single scene. But there are going to be moments in your career that are going to break you. If not one specific scene, then the compilation or the compounding effect of all of those traumas for years and years and years is going to catch up to you. So we are very grateful to have Matt Davis on this episode. He shares his own struggles with mental health and the things that he has done to make sure that he isn't just surviving the forensic field, but he can actually get to a point where he is thriving, both at work and at home. This is one of our lengthier discussions, so I broke it up into 2 parts. You'll be able to hear the first part today, and then just come back next week to hear the second part of this episode. Before we start this episode, our guest would like to share a disclaimer that the opinions shared are their own and not representative of their current or past employment. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Forensics Unfiltered. And we do have a special guest with us today. Can't wait to introduce you to Matt Davis. It's kind of a full circle moment. I remember the first time I met Matt was in our forensic field training officer course. He was either just newly promoted or was getting promoted to supervisor. And he has stuck around ever since. So he's taken the forensic supervision course. He's currently taking the forensic supervision level 2 academy. He's been to our summits. And now he actually feels led to teach. So he's joining us as an instructor for the Forensic Field Training Officer Virtual Academy in March 2025. So welcome, Matt. We are very excited to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited. And like you said, a full circle moment. I was thinking about that before coming on and trying to put the years together. And I'm like, wow, I do like this little journey we had.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been this long. Like, The field training officer course was what, like at least 2 years ago?
Yeah, I want to say it was either late 2021 or early 2022. So,
Dang,
yeah.
that's crazy. So can you walk us through your career journey in forensics, maybe from starting as a latent print technician and following up through your supervisory position now?
Sure. So, yeah, I started in the field. It was summer 2013 as a latent print technician with American Systems, which actually same company that Aaron was with as well at that time. And with that being contract work, it was about a year and a half where the contract was ending, which was a good thing to have a contract like that, I guess, end. The unfortunate part is you had about 400 to 500, I think, forensic professionals, all with similar resumes, all in the same area. So now came the reapplication process after doing so coming out of school. And basically, I just kind of sent out everything everywhere, had no destination, things of that nature where I wanted, and ended up Waco, Texas, so middle of Central Texas. Took my application, hired me on to be a latent print examiner in which was September of 2014. And then through that, I was cross-trained as a crime scene investigator, so crime scene latent print examiner. And then throughout that process, our organization went through basically a change in leadership from a sworn position to a civilian position. And that was in January of 2022, where I promoted then to crime scene supervisor. And it's now going, I just completed, I guess, the third year in supervision. So that was last week.
Awesome. So yeah, I did also work on that American Systems contract. That was actually why I went back and got my master's degree, for the same reason that you threw your net wide, because there were hundreds of us looking for a job when that contract ended, and we were competing with each other everywhere across the whole United States. We were competing with each other. So you landed in Texas and eventually ended up in a supervisory role. From what I remember, you were an acting supervisor for quite some time before you actually stepped into that role. I think there's probably a lot of people listening to this podcast right now who are in that same boat where you haven't quite landed the supervisor spot yet, but are doing all of the supervisory duties and functions. So obviously you've had the opportunity to work in military law enforcement, civilian law enforcement, like stateside law enforcement, and those positions obviously come with a lot of demand, a lot of high stress, a lot of exposure to trauma and traumatic events and things like that. So what are some of the significant or pivotal moments that have happened throughout your career that really you think may have had the greatest impact or taken the biggest toll on you?
I would say I don't think I quite got it. I know when I was approaching the forensic field, and everybody kind of has you can either go the lab direction or kind of the field route. So I had my, exposure with American Systems to kind of the lab sort of thing. And I don't think you quite felt the same trauma. I guess you understood where, like we were getting the evidence that we were processing at that time, but you didn't really have quite the connection that you do with some of the field work. So the field work would be kind of where you develop more, I would say, or you're exposed more to that trauma. And I kind of got mine. So I started in September of 2014. And one of the first incidences where I actually was exposed to the high stress, high trauma was actually May of 2015, where it ended up making national news, but it was actually like the Twin Peaks biker shootout was one of the first big scenes where there were 9 casualties. And I want to say 14 or 15 people that were actually injured. And the stress and trauma kind of induced there is while we were processing the scene, we basically had somebody following us with all their armor, with like rifle, every step that we took, just because it was so high of a scene and there were so many people there and there was talks of, retaliation and things like that. So you're not only processing, 9 deceased at this time. Now you are taking in the whole security of that because it happened at a like outdoor mall location. So they have a variety of different, areas that people could come into. So that kind of high processing nature was my first exposure to it. I think the one where I actually took in the first initial trauma, and I know a lot of people who may listen will resonate and relate to it, is dealing with kid ones. And we had a search that actually came out. It was a missing child. I think it was the day before that we actually found them. There was a Amber Alert that was sent out for the kid, things like that, all generated by the mom, things of that nature. They go through the whole interview process with the mom, through the Amber Alert, things like that. She ends up leading us to basically where she dumped the kid, which happened to be in a dumpster in a bunch of trash bags. Like, hey, this is where the kid was. And I remember that most vividly is because it was a long day. We had already had the evening before where we're searching, and that once those hours kind of tick, that it's not usually going to end up in a good result. Mm-hmm. So we ended up it was two people that went out there, myself and someone else, along with the Crimes Against Children detective, and we were there and we were still sifting kind of through the stuff, and we get to one bag and it's like, all right, this is a little heavier. And the first encounter I had with it is you could feel the top of a head through the trash bag. And you're like, okay, but you're like, kind of have to confirm. You just kind of open and peek in and you're just like, yep, you see, and it was a 2-year-old. So you see a 2-year-old in a trash bag and you're just like, well, like, okay, this is what it comes down to. And you're still holding it together, things of that nature. And it's one of the first like exposures where I had that, hey, crime scene and forensics is different, even than, law enforcement and, being a police officer, because I had someone that had showed up on scene. They're like, are you sure that it's him? And my first response was, well, do you want to go and feel the head that like I just did? Like how else are you supposed to know? And I call them like the door-to-door calls, basically. Like you hold it together until you get to that, door of your house. You open the door and you just lose it. Like that was the first time I truly remember like getting home and basically just being like, what happened? And just tears flowing. Like it's not something that when you go into the field that you're like, you can imagine, taking a 2-year-old out and basically like a trash bag of a dumpster. Like that's not something that everybody's like, oh, you want to sign up for, solving these murders and things like that. But some of the acts and stuff that you see, you're just mentally not prepared for it. Even, to this day, doing it well over 10 years now, there's still some stuff that you're like, how does humanity, like, how are they capable of some of these acts? So I think that was the first real one, I guess, that you kind of feel the most. So.
Yeah, like as we start working, we get exposed to a variety of different things, and we know that we're going to be exposed to a variety of different things over the course of our career. But I've worked in the field for 20 years now. I've never worked a scene with 9 deceased people, So even some of us are working scenes that are even more extreme than some of us are working, That's very unusual, very rare. I think the most deceased people I've ever had on one scene is like 3. So blowing that up by 9, or, people that have worked cases with even more, it's no wonder. I mean, it's all traumatic, but those are certainly extreme high stress, extreme high pressure situations. Not only just what you're dealing with on the scene, but also just the chaos and all of the people and the high pressure of the media and all those things that come along with those type of scenes as well. Lean a lot. That's a lot of extra stress on the people working the scene and the supervisors that are running those scenes, for sure.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that I've only had to work one mass shooting, but I've actually had 2. So the other one I had happened in 2022. Our people were just needed to scan the scene. That's all they wanted. It was an officer-involved shooting that then slowly expanded as I started out at the hospital with the suspect, and I was just getting messages up. We found 2 people. up, now it's 3, now it's 4, now it's 5. And you're just like, we went from scanning a scene to pretty much now you're working another mass shooting. And, I don't necessarily think it's a distinguished thing to have to work, 2 mass shootings, but there are 3 people on our team that have had that experience. So
I think what's important to note here too is mass shootings, yes, are horrific, but there are other scenes as well that are horrific in their own way that probably stay with you for just as long. We've talked about this before where, I've worked scenes where it's supposed to be like, oh, this is just ordinary. Like, it's not anything that should affect you. And so the supervisor kind of just brushes over it like, oh, you'll be fine. But what was kind of the take on mental health, during those first initial traumas that you experience in forensics or in law enforcement in general?
Yeah, I would say it is definitely something that is slowly working its way into, because we all have probably heard, whether it's, suck it up, buttercup, or embrace the suck, like, hey, this is your job. This is, what you have to do. And so the first one that I worked in 2015 with the biker shootout one, I wasn't actually in a supervisory role. That was just as, a crime scene investigator. So that was a little different. You experienced the long hours and you could see, kind of the group bonding together. But, I think it was at least 15-hour days because they had to send us home at some time. And, you're going on 4 or 5 days of 15-hour shifts. That in alone is taxing, letting alone the visual stuff they're seeing. And then in the 2022 one, I was actually the supervisor for that. And I think part of it is, seeing your people go through it and, they're all processing it and you're working together, because our end goal is to get, justice for the actions. And that's what everybody kind of says to push forward. But eventually you do have to address everything that you are seeing, because if you're in the career long enough, and depending on, where your jurisdiction or agency is, the bodies tend to pile up. And if you don't do anything with that, you're just sitting there with all that stuff that you're trying to process and carry on with a, normal life, so to speak. And I think that's where kind of the shift I've seen, and you guys do a really good job with your classes. And that's where, I felt more comfortable to speak out kind of on the FTO day and addressing the mental health that, allowed me now as a supervisor to be open with, my journey with it. And I think that's the best way, kind of leading from the top and being open to see like, hey, like, you don't have a supervisor that's you're going to go to this next one. Like, no, you have someone that is taking into account, they know the toll and they're not afraid to speak out on it. And I think that's where we've talked before about, the stigma of it. And it's like, oh, well, you kind of chose this job. And it's like, when you really break it down, everything you're going to is more than likely that reporting party's worst day. And you're going to it as a normal day. And that's just not something that everybody can seem to grasp the concept on.
So for you, over kind of the evolution of your career, at what point did you realize you probably needed like a little more help than just you trying to process things yourself? And maybe what were some things that you tried that weren't successful for you versus like what you eventually found that was successful with helping you process some of this stuff?
So 2020 was our infant death that we had. And that one, like I said, that was the first one that really hit. And, unfortunately took to wrong ways of coping. And, it's like, would get home. First thing I'd do, it's like, oh, crack a beer, like sit down. And before you know it, you're like, okay, now you got to go to work. And got married in 2019. And it's like, you have a, significant other that is seeing the changes and are seeing the way that you're trying to cope. And it's like, nope, you need to get some help, in other ways. And sometimes even trying like working out is good. And you get that, hour or so burst afterwards. And that is good. That's a good way to clear. I always recommend people after, a day of work and seeing stuff to separate and, have that, but that only lasts for so long. So there needed to be something else that actually, came about. So I want to say it was late 2020 or early 2021 when I started to go see a counselor for it and kind of talk through the stuff, because the trauma, like I mentioned, was adding up and was not dealing with it in healthy ways, to the point where since 2021 to now have a standing weekly appointment. There doesn't have to be anything that could have happened. It's just kind of talking through and either treat it as, hey, we're just checking in, chatting for, an hour. And the nice thing that we have here at the department is we get 3 hours of wellness, whether it's working out, things like that. And an hour with a counselor actually counts towards the wellness. So it's just a great, opportunity that we have within the department. But those regular check-ins have allowed, not to say that there haven't been hard times, because we can get into one, recently here, but have allowed to have that base starting point. And so that's where I, recommend to my team and, other forensic professionals, like, there's nothing against going to talk to someone else, because a lot of what we, talk about, you talk with your unit and things like that. And we discover the trauma bonding and things like that, but that's just within your unit. You still have to go home to a family oftentimes and kids and other things, and basically forget that you saw those things that you saw, because you don't really want to expose a spouse or significant others to, some of the atrocities that you see. And I think finding a counselor, therapist, whatever you want to call them, to be able to, I say, information dump basically that stuff off, is really a good way to do so. And it's healthy, even if it's not a high stress incident or just stuff going on at work, just to kind of, get yourself recharged basically.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of brought that up about seeing a counselor. There's definitely some stuff that I learned the hard way after seeking counseling as well. Is number one, like, if you have the capacity and this is something that you want to work towards or work on, I think it's great to find a counselor when you're not like so far down in the dumps. You can build that rapport so they can kind of clue into like, oh, they're declining. Because I felt like the further and further down you are spiraling with depression or anxiety or whatever, the longer it's going to take for counseling to take effect, to work. And it's really hard during those times to be able to articulate to someone what you're feeling, why you're feeling a certain way, why you're having outbursts of anger and stuff like that. So I'm glad that it did work out for you as far as like a regular counselor goes. But I think that might be some of the reason why, especially people in our field where we don't talk about our feelings openly very often, we just kind of stuff it down. It's even more unnatural for people to want to seek out regular counseling because they're not used to talking about those things.
Sorry, I wanted to add in too. We recently had Jason Cole on the podcast. I know you had listened to that one as well, Matt. And he was talking about how, like, as forensic professionals, we should be going to the doctor regularly and like getting checkups to make sure that we're staying healthy. And I think if you added both these components, like if you were checking, not only like regularly checking on your physical health to make sure that you're not getting things like high blood pressure and you're not sleeping anymore and like all of these kind of physical ailments, and then also supplementing with this other piece of it that is, like Ashley said, and like you said, you're not waiting until it gets really bad. It's just a regular part of your just health. Your overall health is just touching on these pieces all the time, can probably help us get through our career in a much better place and out into retirement in a much healthier place.
Yeah, and that's kind of the, motto, I think, when we were, talking about wanting to kind of address this topic, but, kind of taking it from, you don't just have to like survive the field of forensics, and basically the surviving to thriving aspect. Like, you can still be in this field choosing healthy, options and extending your career. And I know there's been, several talks of people like, oh, they didn't think they were going to make it, another 5 years, and then they started doing stuff healthier, whether it's working out and eating or picking up, better habits outside of work, to know that, like, okay, hey, you're going to be in a good mindset when you go to work, because there's no avoiding the type of work, that we do in this field, but you can have yourself in a better mindset going into that work too.
Yeah. So were there situations that you found where maybe regular counseling, we've called it talk therapy, where you're talking things out? Did you find there were situations where maybe that didn't work out or wasn't very effective?
Yeah. So the first one where I kind of found out that I'm like, okay, we're not getting anywhere with this, I need to do something else. Just talking and walking it through, it's not working. Like, we're just kind of rehashing stuff and there's no healing. It's just basically putting on a Band-Aid, taking it off, putting it on, and you still have the same stuff. Would be that second mass shooting with the 5 people, because we actually had, in that one, it was a 12-year-old girl, a 14-year-old boy, the mom, and then 2 of the neighbors, because it was such a spread out scene, because you had an officer shooting that was down the street. You had one house, the neighbor's house. You had the main house where, the suspect lived with their family. And so it was so spread out, kind of, I delegated each person kind of an area, like, this is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to do. And I had the actual, like, the family house where the 2 kids and then the mom were actually there. And I just remember vividly, I'm like, I can walk through and I still see, like, everything, like, it was still there. And what we talked about, with my therapist is, are you generating, like, an internal response? Like, when you see those images, are they just images and you can move aside? Or is it actually giving, like, you feel anger, you feel some sort of feeling when you think about that? And so that's what was happening with this, is I was still feeling a tightness, not necessarily like a queasiness or whatnot, but you just didn't feel yourself when you were, talking about it, or even just kind of going back through photos or reports, to which led us to look at another therapy, which she currently had at the time, which was EMDR. And basically it's a eye movement training thing. So while you're walking through whatever incident or whatever thing you're struggling with, your eyes are just tracking. It's like a light board, basically, for those that haven't experienced or are looking into it. And basically you're walking through, you do check-ins throughout, kind of where it is on your scale of how you're feeling, and you're just answering questions and going back and forth, and you're just watching a light go back and forth. And the way that it's working is allowing you to process something different. So watching the light and basically creating different neural pathways to not allow the same tension. So we actually ended up starting doing that. And we were actually talking about this a couple of weeks ago, my therapist and I, and they're like, did we ever actually finish? And I'm like, well, we got, like, through, like, the first room, which was the most, we started at, like, the one that basically brought up the most emotion. So we started there and we got through that. But apparently that first room was what was causing the most reaction out of me. So I felt good about that situation with the EMDR. And it's just a couple sessions, and you basically, since you are rehashing that trauma, you come up with, basically, at least we did, a storage box where, okay, now you're going to put all your thoughts back in this, like, lockbox. Mine was basically, I said it was like a fingerprint card box with a lock where you can slide your thoughts in the top, seal it till the next time, and you're not thinking about it, afterwards. And because it is a very fight or flight kind of scenario that you're working through, to where you get really amped up because you're talking about it, and then you come up with, basically, hey, where's your kind of, like, happy place to calm your feelings back down? And then, the session would end because you're through that way. So I did have that experience with the EMDR.
Oh, I've never done EMDR. Like, I have a best friend that's a therapist. She's certified in EMDR, so I know some about it. But it sounds like, instead of a regular talk therapy session where they're like, tell me about your week and how does this make you feel, it's using more, like, imagery and seeing if your body is responding to that imagery or not. Is that accurate?
I would say so. It's more so like you kind of like walk through the scene and it's like, what are your, I say your sensory, like, what are you feeling? Do you smell anything? It's going through the whole process all while you're basically just watching a light. So the best way they say is it's basically rewiring your pathways so that when those images or smells or things come up, that you're not having, that type of reaction to it. And one of the best kind of explanations that I've gotten from my therapist is basically the pain is really not going to go away. We call it like our little pain circle. Like if you put a pain circle in like a square box, you're just trying to limit that. So when you are moving around day to day, you're not bumping into that all the time, because we know the stuff that we see is going to be there, and you're just trying to minimize basically that. And that's what the EMDR also does as well.
Okay, so that's the eye movement therapy. So we've talked about your first initial experience with counseling, just regular talk therapy. With that specific scene, you tried out EMDR, and then there was another thing that happened last year where your counselor advised a different treatment.
Okay, I am going to stop it right there. I know I'm leaving you on a bit of a cliffhanger. You'll have to come back next week to see which therapy Matt tried next. But to just give you a little bit of a teaser or a clue, I actually heard of this therapy first from the account Emergency Resilience with Alex Jabber. She has actually done a PhD on this therapy, and the PhD is titled Rescuing the Firefighter's Physique, an analysis of this therapy to treat post-traumatic stress disorder. So, in the meantime, please share this episode. It is not easy to be vulnerable and talk about these things on a public platform. So we're very, very grateful for Matt to use his voice in this way. The best thing that you can do to support Matt and to support us on this mission of talking about mental health in the forensic field is to make sure to share this episode with your friends, coworkers, colleagues. We would really appreciate it. All right, see you next week. Thank you so much for being here and listening to Forensics Unfiltered. If you liked this episode, would you do us a favor and leave a review letting us know specifically what you liked about this topic? It will only take a minute, but it will really help us plan future episodes so we can bring you more topics that you want to listen to. We'll be sure to provide any links from today's episode in our show notes on our website. Head to www.gapscience.com. Until next time, stay safe out there.